Of course it is. Peculiar interest?
Oh, yeah.
Which one?
Good afternoon and welcome to our Ordinary Council meeting here in Orbost Corporate Centre. This building was originally built on the 28th, or originally opened on the 28th of February 1969 by the Victorian Premier Sir Henry Bolte, and from all accounts it was a very prestigious occasion. The last Shire of Orbost meeting was held here on the 11th of the 11th 1994. And there was also a special meeting held here on the 13th of April 2016, and it was held up here to adopt the draft budget and draft council plan. So it's great to have the third of our series of meetings that we're having outside the corporate centre, and after this meeting we'll be doing a complete review on how effective it's been, taking our ordinary council meetings out of the Bairnsdale Corporate Centre, and I think anecdotally from the feedback that I've had individually it's been quite well received. East Gippsland Shire Council live streams, records and publishes its meetings via webcasting to enhance the accessibility of its meetings to the broader East Gippsland community. These recordings are also archived and available for viewing by the public or used for publicity or information purposes. At the appropriate times during the meeting, any members of the gallery who are addressing the council will have their image, comments or submissions recorded. Please ensure that all mobile phones and other electronic devices are turned off or in silent mode for the duration of the meeting. On behalf of Council, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting. I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and to elders from other communities who may be here today. Item 1.2, Mr CEO, do we have any apologies?
Nil received, Mr Mayor.
Item 1.3, declaration of conflicts of interest.
We've received none.
Yes, sorry, Mr Mayor, I'd like to declare a conflict of interest for item 7.3.
Thank you, Councillor O'Connell. Item 1.4 is the confirmation of the previous minutes, that the minutes of the ordinary council meeting that were held on Tuesday 5th of June 2018 be confirmed, and that the minutes of the special council meeting held on the 26th of June 2018 be confirmed. Whoever moved Councillor Pell's, seconded Councillor Toohey. Is there any questions before we put that? No questions, I'll put that motion. All those in favour? Against? It's carried. Thank you. The next ordinary meeting, council meeting, is on Tuesday the 7th of August at 2018 to be held at the Bairnsdale Corporate Centre, 273 Main Street, commencing at 6 p.m. Item 1.6, are there any requests for leave of absence? Councillor Toohey.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. 18th of September until the 3rd of October inclusive. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Toohey. Item 1.7, Mr CEO, do we have any public questions?
Mr Mayor, we've received 4 public questions. The first public question is from Heather Tyrrell. The question is that a representative from the Historical Society. The old damaged water troughs in Martins Road on council pound land, is it the property of the Shire? That's the first question. And the second question, if it is, would you consider and agree to donate it to the Historical Society? I'll ask Mr Waits to respond to that. Thank you.
Councillors, I'm not really aware of whether that is. I would assume if it's on council property it will be a council asset. We're quite happy to talk to the Historical Society if there's a better use for a bit of infrastructure that's just declining in the paddock. Thank you.
Councillor Pell's got a comment?
Yes, just recently I was chatting with some of the locals, and there seems to be a wave on the old-fashioned water troughs. They're coming back into vogue to do up and have as display pieces. So if it was a council piece, it would be great if the Historical Society could have it.
Thanks, Councillor Pearls.
Yeah, Martin's Road.
Thank you, Mr. CEO.
Mr Mayor, the second question is from Audrey Vanderberg, and she'd like to come forward and ask the question.
Ms Nelson, could you please switch it? Thanks.
It's with concern I ask Council to strongly lobby federal and state parliaments to eradicate feral animals that are destroying the environment of East Gippsland. I ask the Council to coordinate with all shires east and northeast of Melbourne to deal with this problem as a united group. Please be proactive and act now.
Thank you.
I'll ask Mr Holton to respond.
Thank you very much for that question. Whilst Council doesn't deal directly with feral animals, our responsibility lies largely with domestic animals and livestock. We do, on the occasion when residents trap feral cats, we ensure that those feral cats are dealt with humanely by a veterinarian. The authority that deals mainly with feral animals in the landscape is the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning. They are the primary prosecutors of any action that would be taken in respect of feral animals. However, I would be more than happy to voice your concerns to my colleagues in that department, the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning, at the next opportunity when it arises, and also speak to colleagues in neighbouring councils about an approach to working with the state government on dealing with those issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pearls, you had a question?
Yes, I have. I think just recently the Planet Ark process was just undertaken not so long ago with regards to eradication of foxes, but I think maybe Audrey's more concerned with the deer and those animals that are around our highway at the moment. We seem to be having a huge amount of them in and around the urbanised areas, so I think the concern is about those and wild dogs.
Thanks, Councillor Pearls. Councillor Ellis, you had a question?
More a statement, Mr Mayor, just in relation to the response. At a state government level, I am aware that DELP has been undertaking a large amount of work and research into the problems of feral animals, not only in Gippsland but in the northeast in particular. There are a series of policies that the state government just recently introduced in relation to the management of feral animals, and I see that the catchment management authorities in the northeast of the state have also undertaken studies and certain corrective actions against these animals. It probably, as Mr Holton has referred to, would be handy for Council to speak with our colleagues at DELP to prosecute the concern of the community in relation to the impact of feral animals, particularly deer, horses and dogs, as the three major concerns at this time here. And finally, and of course there's cats and pigs as well, of course, but to keep it under that one term, and to highlight the problem. We are also aware that the state government is to make announcements in relation to the management of feral animals in the near future.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis.
Mr Mayor, question number 3 is also from Audrey Vanderberg. Ms Vanderberg.
Would Council please advise all ratepayers and residents of the protocol of approaching Council at public question times? It's not enough to advertise the council meeting in the local papers, as some residents either don't buy these papers or don't read the council news. Could council address this lack of correct information by enclosing the protocol of addressing council meeting in with the rates notice? Could council address this lack of full and accurate information by educating front of house staff at head office and agencies? Thank you.
I'll ask Ms Bennett to respond. Thank you, Ms Bennett.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I'm sure, like councillors, firstly, I'm disappointed to hear that people have tried to lodge a public question time and that hasn't been possible. So on behalf of the organisation, my apologies for that. The question has many parts, so forgive me if I miss one, but if we start, could council address this lack of full and accurate information by educating front of house staff? Yes, we absolutely can. We felt that we had, but clearly perhaps the last set of changes that were introduced haven't been properly communicated, so we will take it on notice to do that. We will also attempt to get written information out more proactively to the likes of our outreach centres and our business centres, perhaps displayed on local notice boards, in local newsletters and any other forum that we can think of or may be suggested. In terms of the suggestion that we pop a copy of that document in the rate notice, I'm certainly happy to take that on notice, but I can't give a commitment at this stage because there's a lot of pressure on what goes into that envelope. You can imagine most of the units of the organisation think that's a great way to disseminate information, and it is, but I just need to put this request in with those, and if there's room, then I think it's an excellent suggestion and very happy to comply.
Thank you, Ms Bennett.
The fourth question is from Mr Ben Pye. Mr Pye.
With regards to the solar bulk buy scheme, approximately 2/3 of the solar profits will flow directly out of the region to Melbourne. How does our council support and think that this is good for their residents, the businesses and the region?
Ms Nelson.
Thank you. Just a little bit of context for the alternative energy project and bulk buy scheme that Council's running. Over the last 12 months, roughly, we undertook an exercise in understanding how we can shift energy use in East Gippsland to more take-up of more alternative energy and what the opportunities were to do that. And in the consultation that we did, 85% of people who engaged in that process identified that they were concerned about the cost of electricity, and that key barriers to reducing energy costs were cost of solar systems in East Gippsland, the motivation and lack of good information to actually support good decision making. So what we did was engage experts to help us understand what action council could take to help community members take up solar energy in a more proactive way. And there was significant support through that process for council to facilitate a solar bulk buy scheme. And clearly there are lots of benefits for people taking up more solar generation. And a solar bulk buy program is one of the ways that we can actually increase people's access to solar systems. By reducing that upfront cost and information barriers, the system that we've chosen engages local installers, and with the approach that we've taken, there is also a contribution to community projects being offered solar systems. And one of the biggest impacts is actually a reduced volume of money that goes out of this community, and I can't remember the figures, but it's quite large amount of money that will be retained here that previously went to large electricity supply companies, which would no longer be the case. So as a result of the recommendations of the Bright Energies, or the Bright Future Alternative Energy Project, we did identify the delivery of a solar bulk buy scheme as one thing that council could facilitate, and using the resources that we have had through the Victorian Government, we've acted to engage expert advice to help us resource and implement a scheme over the next 12 months. So we took advice on the most appropriate way to implement a scheme as a local government organisation and looked at what the sector had been doing across Victoria and where other local governments have actually implemented these schemes. And experience has been that managing bulk buy schemes with multiple local providers results in a significant number of challenges and administrative burden associated with it, which means that it's not as effective. Our selection of the process is within our resources because we've engaged a not-for-profit organisation to help us do this. It provides people with sound independent advice to local residents and in the form of a quote which they can then market test with local providers. And it's been, I guess, specifically the people that we've chosen, and many bulk buy arrangements don't use any local content. In this case, we are using local providers. We understand that there's some angst about it, but the intent of increasing the opportunities for people to access cost-effective solar, for local installers to be engaged in the process for this first 12 months and to have hopefully the impact of making the market more competitive and increasing the volume of people using solar. That's our clear intent. But I am very happy to have a separate conversation with you because I can't have a conversation with you now.
That was a lot of words to not actually answer the question. I think you did really well there. Actually have the question answered. Okay. I do have a second question.
Is that been submitted? Sorry, you had a follow-up question?
Yeah, I do, with regards to the bulk buy scheme.
Yeah, what's the question?
It's disruptive to local solar businesses and it makes it harder for them to establish themselves. How does our council support and think this is beneficial to the residents of our region?
Yeah, so as Ms Nelson answered before, it was we're encouraging an uptake of solar with some right advice around tier 1 equipment, and certainly I was at the installers meeting that you were at, and local providers of that tier 1 equipment have said that they could potentially in the future match that, so certainly the next iteration of bulk buy, they'll certainly be considered. Yes, Councillor Buckley.
I take it to mean, in that case, Mr Mayor, I take it to mean that we can involve the local suppliers in the bulk buy part of it, whether with materials, or am I wrong in, or right, if you to put it more succinctly, that the local providers can't supply this bulk buy stuff?
So in relation to the question you asked, that yes, certainly the providers of tier 1 equipment, because we've got to compare apples with apples, that were at the installers meeting that I was at, certainly indicated that they'd be competitive with that equipment, and we've certainly invited them to the next iteration of solar bulk buy to be considered.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Ms Nelson.
If I can just emphasise the fact that the process provides people with a quote which they can compare with local providers through this current program. So if people want to get a quote and get that independent advice about what their system should be and then compare it with local providers, then they're certainly welcome to do that. And if there's an indication that local providers can be competitive and people are happy to buy local, that's absolutely fine as well. That's part of what this process is trying to generate as many people using solar as possible.
Thank you, Ms Nelson. Any further questions? Mr CEO.
No, that's it, Mr Mayor.
Item 1.8.1 is the Assemblies of Councillors, June 2018. It's a recommendation. Moved Councillor Pels, seconded Councillor Reeves. Any questions before we put that motion? All those in favour? Against? It's carried. Thank you. Item 1.9, have we received any petitions, Mr.
Nil petitions, Mr Mayor.
And item 2, notices of motion or rescission of motion.
Nil received, Mr Mayor.
Item 3, any deferred business.
Nil deferred business, Mr Mayor.
Item 4 is councillor reports. And Councillor Tui, would you like to start us off, please?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have my report's very brief this month, and I have lodged it with the council officers. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Tui. Councillor O'Connell.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I will lodge my report with the officers too. I'd just like to say I'm happy to be here in Orbost today. It's an exciting time to be able to get out of the corporate centre, and being from Omeo, I understand what it's like to be outside of the main centre, so I'm pleased that we are able to be out in the smaller communities today. I've had a busy month, but I just wanted to focus on one concept, I suppose, that I attended the official opening of the 2018 snow season in Mount Hotham with Mayor Tino, and also Grattan Mullet was doing the Welcome to Country. We've also since had a meeting with the CEO of Mount Hotham and the CEO and councillors of the Alpine Shire to begin discussions about marketing the Great Alpine Road. With this, there's significant opportunities to collaborate with other shires and agencies to promote the Great Alpine Road from East Gippsland. It's been a great start to the snow season with plenty of snow and good weather, and I'd just like to encourage businesses from East Gippsland, from Bairnsdale right through to Omeo on the Great Alpine Road, that working with Mount Hotham to promote and encourage skiers and snowboarders to travel that way via East Gippsland is an untapped market. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor O'Connell. Councillor Reeves.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and it's lovely to be here. Excuse my back, everybody in the gallery there. I've just been looking at the minutes of the meeting held here on the 11th of November 1994, and there were photographs of councillors and staff taken at 12:55, so hopefully we can do the same, although we're streaming it so the images are there anyway. There's two areas that I want to concentrate on. One was about this time of year, where a lot of the service clubs have their changeovers, and I've attended many Rotary and Lions changeover celebrations, and it was just, I wanted to draw attention to the importance of volunteerism in our Shire, and how those service clubs and volunteers, whether they be CFA, SES, the Coast Guard down at Marlow today, how important they are in gluing our communities together. So that's the first one. The second is, at the weekend I attended the Deep Winter Festival here in Orbost, and what a fantastic night it was on Friday night. And by coincidence last night on Backroads on the ABC, there was an article on Scottsdale in northeast Tasmania, and I'm sure that many of us who watched that show drew many parallels about a town that had a declining timber industry and re-establishing itself. And I thought that there was a lot of parallels to what we're doing here around the likes of Chris and Gabby and establishing these niche businesses. And what really struck me with that meeting, or that show last night, was that in future, in country Victoria and towns like ours, it's unlikely there'll be one big employer providing hundreds of jobs. There's likely to be hundreds of enterprising people like the Sailors' Graves, like the Bushware Cafe out there at Cabbage Tree, like what's happening at Omeo, with potential mountain bike paths and so on. Those lots of many things are going to create the wealth in the future, and it's up to us as a Shire to make sure we support them. And I will also note for us here in Orbost that one of the jewels in the crown of our area is Cape Conran, and there's a change in the management of Banksia Bluff, and we need to ensure that Parks Victoria do it well, because this is one of the reasons many people come to our area to go and camp there. And so I think that we need to make sure we're in partnership with Parks Victoria to ensure that the likes of Conran and our natural resources are as well supported as those enterprises. My report's there for the record too, councillors.
Thank you, Councillor Reeves. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Also not much to report this month. However, among our not usual duties, I attended the Imagine Fusion Fibre Arts Network Incorporated show at the East Gippsland Art Gallery. It was well attended. The artists did a fantastic job as always. Crystal, Lisa and Sonia were doing a great job behind the scenes. But last night, the Deputy Mayor and I attended Council's first planning mediation session. This is a new process allowing objectors and proponents to come together and have thorough and respectful discussion around planning matters. The process was a real success and many of the points of view were expressed. Speakers were passionate while still being respectful to one another, with a possible compromise being identified. And I'd like to commend the attendees and also the Deputy Mayor for chairing the session. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Roberts. Thanks for the insight on that first mediation process. Councillor Buckley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yesterday I stumbled across a very interesting bunker, concrete bunker, igloo-style thing with about a foot-thick concrete walls on private property on the Nungurna slopes. And it intrigued me because it doesn't seem to be listed anywhere or recognised anywhere in our military history. And it turns out, a very, very stout building indeed, blast-proof, and it turns out it was a little powerhouse to run a radar station, and situated on just one of the peaks of or well, not peaks, but you know, the slopes. And I found it extremely interesting to think that it hadn't been sort of recognised, and I haven't heard of anybody knowing about it. So thank you for that, Mr. Mayor, and I'll follow it up and see if I can find some more about it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Buckley. Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a lengthy report, so I will simply table that and just select one or two matters to mention that may be of interest. A disturbing matter was, as I previously reported to Council, was my attending the inaugural opening of a food kitchen in Lakes Entrance to supply foods and assistance to people in need in our community. I found that to be a disturbing issue when we have so many problems in our region. And I'd like to particularly commend the proprietors of the Pinocchio Inn restaurant in Lakes Entrance and Ms. Louise Henderson and her assistants from the Opportunity Shop in Lakes Entrance that have provided monies and assistance to that particular project. I just hope that there is no longer a need for that into the future. I've also been, I should flag, I've also been approached by a group recently formed in Bairnsdale to see that the East Gippsland Shire is an asylum seeker friendly region. I will be addressing Council on that matter at our next ordinary meeting and have received correspondence from Ms Fry and several other members of the Bairnsdale community. I see it as a worthy consideration of Council, and as I say, flag that I will be bringing that to our next meeting for consideration. I've attended a series of launches across the Shire over the past month, and to save time here this afternoon, aside from congratulating the many volunteers that Councillor Rees alluded to earlier, I will leave my report as such. Thank you.
Yes, it is interesting, Councillor Ellis, that East Gippsland Shire volunteerism is way above the state average. Councillor White, would you like?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just briefly, being the time of changeover dinners, I did attend the Lindenow Lions Club changeover dinner, which I was very, very happy to do so. And at that changeover, they also addressed us about their field day activities and how well that had worked out. But what was really pleasing, because you know, these people are very passionate about their region, was to see them distribute cheques to most of the local sporting clubs, schools, kindergartens, etc., for their participation, because it galvanises the community, brings them all together at the field days where they all have specific functions, parking, catering, information, etc. And it was just wonderful to see that, you know, these very small groups in our community are benefiting, but are also contributing to that great event, the East Gippsland Field Days. So I do commend the Lions Club on their efforts. They've had another very good year, and I wish them the best for the rest, you know, in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor White. Councillor Pals.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm a bit tired today. I'm just freshly back from a 38-hour drive with my son up to Queensland and back while he raced his motocross up there. And the things mothers sacrifice for their sons, for the acquisition of their sporting behaviours. I'm a bit exhausted and tired, but all I'd like to say is I had the privilege of representing our Mayor at the Bairnsdale and District Art Society Annual Art Show. It was a very active night with much enthusiasm for the evening and the official outcomes of the paintings. Item 133 was Trish Wagstaff, who did an absolutely amazing, intricate pencil fine art drawing of a rhinoceros called Frau. And it was so intricate and finely detailed, it was extraordinary. It was like a photo, it was that detailed. That was the first prize of the night, and the second, a special recommendation award went to Maria Bold with her watercolour, which was of apples, and she seemed to be a new artist. There was also a young junior award, which went to Talia Cook for her coloured pencil drawing of Molly my goat. With regards to that, travelling afar and looking around and seeing what other places has is always interesting. And you look at the sort of outer-lying areas of Queensland and they have not unsimilar issues to us with regards to ageing populations and downsizing in industries, people moving to the more urbanised areas. And they've managed to get smaller businesses up and running. Their region has really, really interesting artworks that you can buy, and you know, you look at it and you sort of think, wow, this is something that we can aspire to in the future. They've got jewellers, they've got mini markets, there's a lot of coffee shops and homemade apple pies and various things. And, you know, I look at those sort of areas that are well established now, and I think, you know, our region can also turn into something not unsimilar in the future. So that's my report, Mr Mayor.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Pels. I've tabled my report, but just a quick summary of a couple of key things. This month saw the launch of the new Four Rivers Young Professionals Group. I thought it was important that we show support for this young group. The name of the Four Rivers says it all. They're trying to engage with young professionals and young people across our whole region. Initially, the meetings are in a forming stage where they're just attending social gatherings, supporting and mentoring each other and encouraging each other's endeavours in their various careers and vocations. They're currently sharing this information and are well entrenched in various community and sporting associations. One of them, young Jack Peterson, is also the East Gippsland Shire Young Citizen of the Year, who reinvigorated the show last year and has got some great ideas around the Bairnsdale show. I've also encouraged them to participate in any community forums that we have throughout the Shire and make sure that they're vocal about what is important to young people in our region. We also saw the official opening of the Lakes Entrance Men's Shed, which I attended with Councillor Buckley and Councillor Ellis. It was a great, very well attended, Councillor Ellis, wasn't it? There was a big crowd of people there. Yeah. This particular project had a few bumps along the way. The facility is a real credit to all that have been involved with it. Must particularly thank the Lakes Entrance Lions Club and Wendy Brady for their patience and determination to see the project through. A project that commenced roughly 4 years ago, Councillor Ellis?
Approximately 4 years ago, Mr Mayor, yes, with the original initiation coming from the Baptist Church and then working in cooperation with the Lions Club. So a genuine cooperative action by all volunteer members too. Yeah.
As we know, the men's sheds are much more than just tinkering around and fixing things and building things. It's a movement that has seen a powerful way of addressing health issues and well-being, and particularly mental health for members of our community. Also attended the National Assembly up in Canberra with Councillor Ellis, and I was quickly given a quick overview of that. This year's conference was themed Australia's Future, Make It Local, all about local government. It reflects not just the wide scope and importance of local government, but its ability to influence and affect fundamental change and improvement for the whole community. The 2018 theme also hints at the strong possibility of a federal election either being called later this year or early next year. That being the case, local government will need to be ready and able to speak and advocate on behalf of our community, and make sure that we get heard and get what we need to make our community stronger. There was a significant program of excellent information provided, but the one that really caught my eye was the one by Bernard Salt. Mr Salt, a former partner of KPMG, has gained national prominence with his astute observations on demography, housing affordability and the evolution of consumer cultures. Of particular interest was a table that presented a smorgasbord checklist for successful regions. I'm keen to present this list for consideration leading into the workshops for our next East Gippsland Shire Economic and Development Strategic Framework. Some of the key items that I'm particularly interested in relate to government's new buzzword connectivity, or as I like to describe it, it's enabling infrastructure that really makes distance irrelevant. Bernard Salt suggested for a successful region you need a strategy around an airport, you need a university presence, you need a local TV station, you need a local radio station, a local paper, a government regional presence, DELP parks, military CSIRO, good hospitals. We have BRHS in Bairnsdale, we have Orbost and Omeo district hospitals. We have a national event. We need to get a national event, either a business event, and we had one recently, the National Horticultural Innovation Days out at Lindenow, and certainly in the visitor space, we're working towards the 2018 National Master Cycling event to be held here in East Gippsland. We need to have good schooling, affordable housing, aged care facilities, a sporting stadium master plan, which we've been working on one for Bairnsdale and now looking at getting funding to do one for the whole East Gippsland Shire. Need to have a good convention centre, local entrepreneurs, really important that we support our local entrepreneurs because they are job creators, not job takers. Need to have destination tourist attractions. 1.2 million visitors visit East Gippsland annually, and that there's great opportunities through produce of provenance and certainly around our new Omeo mountain bike park in creating that destination. Vocational training, we certainly need to get the TAFE sector back up to speed. It's been missing the last couple of years and Fed Training themselves will admit to that. You need to have a strong business awards, recognise success, and our East Gippsland Business Awards were reinvigorated last year with the corporate sponsorship from Federation Business School, who have taken that on for the next 3 years. They talk about a strong cafe culture, and I think we've seen more coffee shops open up in East Gippsland than we have for a long time. And the key one, it was around collaborations and partnerships around federal, state and local government. And this was our major theme when we advocated to Minister John McVeigh recently around the Regional Growth Fund, and that was federal government, state government, together with local government equals collaboration and success and progress. So that was the assembly, but in relation to major events, we have secured the 2018 Masters Road Cycling Championships, an estimated 500 competitors with 2,000 people in our region over 4 days. Cycling Australia says that it will be hosted in the picturesque Gippsland Lakes region for the first time in the event's history. Meetung, Swan Reach and Paynesville will be showcased, along with a number of other tourist attractions, while 500 of Australia's best master cyclists. And to qualify as a Masters, you only have to be 29 in cycling, so you still get the best of the best. So there'll be a road race, time trial and criterium. Minister for Sport John Erin is proud to say he's helping bring the 2018 Cycling Australia Masters the first time into Gippsland. I'm not sure what that means by he's helping us, but that's good. So that happens in the middle of October, 18th to the 21st of October. And just to support the Greater Alpine Road, certainly John Hutchins, the CEO up there, is trying to get engagement around greater summer activity and promoting the Great Alpine Road as a key touring road. So the Weekend Australian on the 22nd of July 2017, Jeremy Thorpe is the Chief Economist for PwC, and he was quoted as saying that this type of tourism is the model for regional communities to survive and thrive. Thorpe says the formula is quite simple. In a 7-year period from 2009 to 2016, consumer spending on experience-based tourism to destination tourism locations was up 26%, while other spending on consumer goods for the same period had only increased 4%. So that highlights the importance of us getting behind and supporting that. A recent Australian report into cycle tourism generally found domestic cycle tourists on average spend more than general domestic tourists per day. However, the total spend over their whole trip was nearly 5 times higher. I think that'll do. The rest of my report's tabled. Thank you. Item 5 is the officer's report. Item 5.1.1 is the Planning Scheme Amendment C125, Implementation of Infrastructure Design Manual. Thank you, Ms Reynolds. Thank you, Mr Hollett.
Good afternoon, Mr Mayor, fellow councillors, members of the Executive and members of the gallery. Good afternoon. This item at 5.1.1 is a planning scheme amendment. The purpose of today's report is to seek your approval to implement the infrastructure design manual into the East Gippsland planning scheme as part of local planning policy and as in a reference document. The infrastructure design manual was first adopted by Council in June 2014 and has been used in operation in planning permits and subdivision applications since that date. The IDM is a document that is a fluid document that provides clarity and standardised Council's requirements for design and development of municipal infrastructure and development infrastructure throughout the Council. It's a joint initiative of Victorian Rural and Regional Councils. You will note that it's a GC amendment is what we are proposing, which is a group council, and we are seeking your approval to participate with 42 other rural and regional councils around the table as part of this planning scheme amendment. The recommendation before you is in 3 parts. We are seeking to ask for the Minister of Planning to intervene in the planning scheme amendment under Section 20, Part 4 of the Planning Environment Act as a group council planning scheme amendment, and also to authorise officers to continue to participate with this planning scheme amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Reynolds. Is there any questions, councillors? So the recommendation's been moved by Councillor Reeves. Do we have a seconder for the recommendation? Councillor Toohey. Speakers?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I remember this in June 2014 and it seemed like a good idea at the time, and it seems like an even better idea now. And an outbreak of cooperation with 42 councils, which is terrific. So let's get on with it.
Is there any further speakers? If there's no further speakers, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Motion's carried. Thank you. Item 5.1.2, East Gippsland Planning Scheme Amendment C147, rezone of 35 Rose Street, Lakes Entrance Bowling Club. Ms Reynolds.
Good afternoon again. This is also a planning scheme amendment, C147, which pertains to property at 35 Rose Street, Lakes Entrance, known as the Lakes Entrance Bowls Club. This item is nearly at the end of its journey as part of a planning scheme amendment, and simply it proposes to rezone the club premises from a public purpose recreation zone to a commercial zone. It is a process that has undergone notice, of which there were no opposing submissions, which means there's no opposition to the rezone of the property. Letters were sent to adjoining owners and it was on exhibition for a month. The recommendation before you, councillors, is to please adopt the exhibited planning scheme amendment at Appendix 1 and therefore submit to the Minister for Planning for final approval to rezone the premise from public purpose, which is a public zone, to a commercial 1 zone.
Thank you, Ms Reynolds. Questions, councillors? Councillor Ellis?
No, I have no questions, so like to, happy to foreshadow that I would move a lakes entrance motion before council.
So recommendation has been moved by Councillor Ellis. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Pell's. Speakers, please.
Mr Mayor and Council, there's not a lot to be said with this matter. This is an ongoing rezoning planning application that is now reaching its final stages, and I commend the recommendation before council to councillors for adoption. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Councillor Pels, did you want to speak?
Yes, I'd just like to say, you know, the Lakes Entrance Bowls Club's a great asset to the community down there, and they were really fortunate to be able to acquire this land at the time, and I think it's just another process. If we can help them out, it's great to be moving this one along. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Pels. Any further speakers? No further speakers. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? That's carried. Thank you. Item 5.1.3 is the drone program, draft amended drone remote piloted aircraft policy and program update. Ms Bennett.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We are presenting this report for two purposes this afternoon. One is asking Council to note the changes that have been made to the policy, and the other is to draw to Council's attention some of the achievements of the drone program since it was implemented 11 months ago. On the first topic, I'm pleased to say that the review of the policy didn't turn up any major amendments. It did, however, turn up some improvements in terms of readability and understandability, some of which were brought forward by Council's Audit Committee. So those changes have been incorporated in the documents. I'd also like to just take a couple of minutes to flag how successful the drone program has been. 36 flights have been undertaken in the last 11 months by our 3 CASA qualified pilots, and conservatively that has saved Council $13,000. That's really in money terms, the savings in terms of keeping our people safe and being able to undertake tricky jobs for a human that can be readily undertaken by the drone has saved both time, administrative effort, and, as I said, has kept our people safe. We're also very pleased to say that the policy, which was produced entirely in-house by our staff, has resulted in a framework for us to operate the drone that has resulted in no complaints. So in this day and age where we're all a bit sensitive about things flying overhead and capturing what we're doing, no citizen has complained that they felt that their privacy was being invaded or that they didn't understand the reason why Council was operating a drone in their area. So I would like to both commend the amended policy to councillors and ask that you formally note that update. Thank you very much.
Ms Bennett, I was wondering if you would mind just describing one of the key activities that its pilot program's undertaken for the benefit of our gallery.
As I said, there have been a range of matters. The drone's been used by each of the directorates and a number of business units. But I think, and I didn't mention, it's also been used by other organisations outside of our own for a fee. Parks and Gardens has used it to capture a photo mosaic to assist with monitoring the removal of vegetation. And Parks and Gardens also use it for tree inspections, and I'm sure you could appreciate that is a tremendous help because of both working at height and the relative ease with which you can pop a drone over a tree. Operations has been by far the major user of the drone, but just a couple of other things there is monitoring the sand movement at Malakuta as a result of dredging, and also landfill revegetation. And Councillor Peltz has asked me to just note that the statutory planning unit has also used the drone, and in its case it captured footage of a particular amenity that was the subject of a planning application, which was then taken down to Melbourne and shown to VCAT, who commended the initiative as a huge saving in time and energy, and also in giving VCAT a much better understanding of where that particular property was and what the constraints might be and how it is currently being used. Thank you, Councillor Peltz.
Thank you, Ms Bennett. Any questions, councillors? Recommendations being moved by Councillor Roberts. Do we have a seconder? Second, Councillor Ellis. Speakers?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. It's fantastic to see an innovative program piloted, or should I say operated by council. The program is reducing risk to council workers and increasing efficiency, reducing costs to ratepayers. It's also flattering to see that it wasn't mentioned that other councils have been requesting to see our policy documents so they may emulate our practices. I'm happy to see that officers are also reviewing all legal regulations to ensure we retain the privacy of our residents. Please consider the recommendation.
Thanks, Councillor Roberts. Any further speakers? Councillor Ellis?
I just wanted to corroborate the comments of Councillor Roberts in terms of the appropriate use of the drones. I would appreciate that there would be some scepticism in the general public as to the appropriate use of the drones. Council has taken great effort to ensure that an appropriate policy, as outlined or referred to by Ms Bennett, has been put into place, and that Council is confident that we comply with all regulatory requirements in the operation of drones, which are seen to be not only an economic but practical use of modern technology. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Ellis. Is there any further speakers? No further speakers. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? It's carried. Thank you. So item 5.2.1 is the adoption of the general valuation for 2018, and we have Ms Collins in attendance.
Thank you, Mr Mayor and councillors. Every 2 years, Council is required to undertake a revaluation of all the rateable and non-rateable properties within the Shire. The 2018 general revaluation has been completed and has been certified as true and correct by the Valuer General Victoria. So Council is now in a position to consider adopting the new property valuations as detailed in the report. Once these valuations have been adopted, they'll form the basis of the calculation for the rates and also the Victorian Government Fire Services Levy for the 2018-19 year. Also to note is that the property owners do have 2 months to object to those valuations, and that's 2 months from the date of notice of the issue of valuation. There is a recommendation before Council for consideration. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Ms Collins. Any questions, councillors? Councillor Buckley.
Yes, I see the capital improved value has gone up by 2.88%. Well, I thought that the rate capping was supposed to be 2.5, so that sort of annuls all that, doesn't it? It overrides all that, and people are paying more rates anyway.
Ms Collins, would you like to answer that, please?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The valuations are used for the distribution of the total amount of rates to be raised. What it does do, that 2.88 means that some properties may pay less than 2.55% increase, others may pay more depending on the movement of the valuations. But a revaluation doesn't raise any additional rates, it's just used to proportionally distribute the total of the rates to be raised. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Ms Collins. Any further questions? Councillor Ellis.
Just to clarify, I understand that the Valuer General is going to take responsibility for the valuation of properties throughout the state of Victoria. Can you tell us when that's coming into account and what impact that will have on Council, please, Mr Collins?
Yes, thank you for that question, Councillor Ellis. This is the last revaluation that Council will be responsible for. The changes to the Valuation Act has given the Valuer General the authority for all the valuations of council properties. That comes into effect, it's in effect now, and they're in the process of awarding contracts for contract valuers to undertake the works for council. So that will happen annually. From here on in, it won't be every second year. Every year there will be a revaluation of properties, but it will be, it's managed and administered directly by the Valuer General Victoria, and council will be required to use those valuations that are provided by the Valuer General. Thank you. Yes, that applies across the state of Victoria.
Councillor Ellis, you had a further question?
Yeah, this is only a mechanical question, and that is, at the present time, council employs a private sector valuer to provide us with valuations. Will that sector or that industry continue, or will the valuations be conducted by the Valuer General's department and his employees?
My understanding is that our current valuation contract ended in April this year. My understanding is that the Valuer General has tendered for a number of contract valuers, and that primarily the majority of the work will be done through those contracts that they're awarding at present. So there may be some in-house staff from the Valuer General assisting, but mostly my understanding is it will be done by contract.
Thank you, Ms Collins. Is there any further questions? Councillor White.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Collins, just if, now does that take the, if somebody was not happy with their rate notice or their valuation, does that take that away from council and have to be redirected to the government, or would council still handle a complaint?
Our understanding of the process will be that council will receive those objections on behalf of the Valuer General, and then they will get considered by the Valuer General directly through the process with whoever the contractor may be appointed for East Gippsland Council or each council. But all of the process will be managed by the Valuer General. The only thing that council will be responsible for in its own right will be the supplementary valuation process.
Councillor Pell's had a follow-up question.
Yes, thank you, Ms Collins. With regards to the Valuer General having the say, and they'll be sending all their people out to go and value people's properties across the state, will there be a savings to council directly because we won't be paying a third party to be doing that, or will we still be paying some kind of an amount with regards to the Valuer General's findings?
There potentially may be a small savings to council, but until we've been through a full process, then I couldn't absolutely say that that would be the case. But certainly we've been advised there will be no additional cost to council for undertaking the revaluation annually. No.
Any further questions? We do have the recommendation before us, councillors. Moved Councillor Pells. We have a seconder. Councillor Reeves. Speakers? No. If there's no speakers, I'll put the motion. All those in
Excuse me,
question?
Mr Mayor.
Yep.
This is a motion, a type of motion. Do I get the opportunity to speak against it?
Yes, you can speak against it.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think we should not revert back to improve our system. While it is reverting back to where we had, it is within our power to have one capital improved valuation, like we had. Orbost had it here, Omeo had it, where you only had to worry about one particular tax. There wasn't a commercial rate, there wasn't a residential rate, it was all classed as one. And it's within our power to go back to that, because it cuts out the grey areas of where you get tradies working out of their backyard and they're only paying a residential rate when they really should be technically, and even doctors and lawyers and such doing the same type of thing where they're only paying a residential rate, and others that are in a clinic or whatever it might be, or a factory, paying a commercial rate which is considerably more. And it would simplify the whole system and do away with those grey areas if we used our powers to go back to a simple single tax instead of the differential rating system we have now. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Buckley, is there further speakers?
No, I was happy to respond if council wished, but
No further speakers? Right of reply?
Yes, I was just about to say, with regards to Councillor Buckley's comments, in a perfect world, Councillor Buckley, it would be advantageous to be viewing that, but at this stage we are addressing what's on the table in front of us, and these are what we need to consider at this stage. So moving forward, I think this is purely something that needs to be endorsed, and next year's rates will be a whole different ball game. So we're at the end of this cycle, and basically we'll be moving on to the new Governor General's valuations, or the Valuer General's recommendations, and we'll be proceeding with those guidelines next year. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Pels. I'll now put the motion. All those in favour? Against? It's carried 8 to 1. Yeah. So item 5.3.1 is adoption of complaints management policy and revised customer response policy. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Carty.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Councillors and members of the gallery. Thank you. The Council recognised the need to develop a complaints management policy as a result of 7 service centres that Council does have and a call centre. The volumes of customer interactions on an annual basis resulting in almost 200,000 site visits at all our service centres together, and about 80,000 phone calls over the year across our contact centre. Just meant that we needed to manage not only customer response but also our complaints and interactions with our customers better. Also to match industry best practice and guidelines from, the Local Government Act, also the Victorian Ombudsman, to make it easy and enable our customers to complain to us easily, but also for us to respond in a timely manner and learn from our complaints management process. As a result, the draft new complaints management policy and the procedure that will guide council staff to ensure that we enable complaints but also respond in a timely manner and learn from those complaints, and make sure that we review our processes, procedures and any other changes that may be required as a result. The document of the policy focuses on the framework, which breaks it down into how we enable complaints and how we make it accessible for our customers to complain to us. And the second stage of the framework talks about responding to complaints and have an introduction of a tiered approach where the frontline, which is the staff members at our service centres and various different offices over the phones, try and deal and resolve with the matter at the earliest and at the first contact as possible. And where unable to do so, we'll make sure that it is passed to the right actioning officer for not just prompt but also accurate and in favour, or making sure that the outcome has been arrived and communicated to the customer. The third bit is to make sure that any complaint that has had the outcome and has been dealt with, that we look at opportunities of improvement. We look at learnings from these complaints and ensure that not only has the customer been communicated to, but as a result the department learns from it, and we ensure we don't try and do the same thing again.
Thank you, Ms. Carty. Any questions, please, councillors? If not, there is a recommendation before you. Moved Councillor Reeves, seconded Councillor O'Connell. Roberts, Councillor Roberts. Speakers?
After having a look at this document, I can see that Swathi and the team are very thorough at the way they handle complaints and dealing with customers, and it's good to see such in-depth analysis and how our system works, and I support this recommendation.
Thanks, Councillor Roberts. Any further speakers? Councillor Pels.
I'd just like to say it's great to be getting some figures coming through, because we're on the new system now and it's really the base figures for us to be dealing with, and it's nice to be seeing something solid, because it's probably 18 months now that we've been into the system. So we have the start and then we have a second lot, so we've got a bit of information coming through, which I think is really great. And you know, 80,000, they do a good job, those girls in the call centre. Can pass that on from the councillors. Thank you.
Any further speakers? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. Urgent and other business. We had any listed? So, councillors, we need to temporarily clear the gallery and need a motion in relation to discussing some contractual matters.
Mr. Mayor, before you go, can you let the gallery know that we have got an afternoon tea with them straight after?
So just for members of the gallery, we're temporarily closing to the public, but we do have an afternoon tea after we've finished, and you're all welcome to join us. Thanks. Yeah. So, Councillor Ellis.
Sure. Councillors, I'll move that Council now close the meeting to the public in accordance with the provisions of Section 89(2) A, C and D and H of the Local Government Act 1989 to consider items 7.1 to 7.4, as these items relate to personnel matters, industrial matters, contractual matters and any other matter which Council considers may prejudice Council or any other person.
So it's been moved by Councillor Reeves, seconded by Councillor Ellis. All those in favour? Against? It's carried unanimously. Thank you.